Good afternoon. I'm Russell Richard. Welcome to Center for Houston's Future Leadership Webcast Series. Today's webcast and webcasts in the future are intended to inform, educate, and engage the community on a broad range of important issues and topics impacting the Houston region. Through engaging conversations with local experts, community leaders, and thought leaders, we hope to uncover the best ideas and best practices for dealing with crisis and other important issues, and to look beyond the current situation and determine its implications on the future, and decide as a community what actions we should be taking now to ensure the social, cultural, and economic well-being of the Houston region. The Center for Houston's Future is a nonprofit established in the year 2000. In fact, this year marks our 20th anniversary. And as we work through COVID-19 coronavirus, we're planning a series of events and programs, and we hope that you will join us. The center works to bring together business, government, and community stakeholders in fact-based strategic planning and collaborations on issues of the greatest importance for the future of the Houston region. Our work focuses on three areas: leadership, strategic initiatives, and community future awareness. For more information about the center and our work, please visit our website, futurehouston.org. We will be taking questions at the end of the conversation. Please use the chat app at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions during the conversation, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can at the end of the discussion. My guest today really needs no introduction. She has been a leader and champion and force for good in the Houston community for many years. In fact, here recently, she, in a very straightforward, matter-of-fact way, has shared some of her views about how we're doing as we lead through this coronavirus pandemic. Houston knows Angela Blanchard as the President Emeritus of Baker Ripley, a very visible leader who played a major role in helping us work through weather disasters like Allison, Katrina, Rita, Ike, and Harvey. But she's much more than that. Angela is a globally recognized expert in disaster response and recovery and community development. Her groundbreaking strategies have created a model for cities across the globe who are struggling with the complex challenges of crisis response, community development, and disaster recovery and resilience. Angela, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you.
Well, thank you for inviting me today. I'm a big fan of the Center for Houston's Future because of your focus both on leadership and insights about where we're headed. So this is a great group for me to spend time with, and I'm glad to have this time with all of you.
Well, I wish the circumstances were different, but nonetheless, it's good to see you, and I think we're all very eager to hear your wisdom and your insights about how we continue to lead our way through COVID-19 coronavirus. What I'd like to do, Angela, is the following. I'd like to frame our conversation in the following ways. I'd like to spend a little time talking about the timing and different stages of a crisis and where we find ourselves now. And I'd like to shift a little bit and ask you to help us understand what leadership should look like, in particular, while we're going through this crisis. Then I'd like for us to talk a little bit about the importance of collaborations and what that means for us as we move forward. And then talk a little bit about where we are now and how do we move forward. So for the benefit of those viewing who haven't seen some of your recent articles in the Houston Chronicle, I may ask you to elaborate on some of the points that you've made, because I thought all of them were very profound and spot on. So let's get started. Let's begin talking about stages and timing of a crisis. And Angela, you, as an international crisis expert, have undoubtedly seen and been involved with working through local crisis and crisis on a national scale. Tell us the different phases of a crisis and where do we find ourselves now, locally, nationally, and globally?
So that's a pretty big question. All right, so here's what my study of disaster response leadership in the disaster arena has revealed in the way of patterns. So in the immediate moment, the incident, when it occurs, when we, in this case, when we first become aware that we have a significant and major disruptive event, in that immediate moment, we're all looking for some form of safety and security. We're scanning the environment, saying, who's around me? What do I have to preserve? What do I have to hang on to? How can I do so? So in that first safety and security, we're looking for some sort of sanctuary. And I think we don't want to rest too long there. The leaders that are most effective in responding to highly disruptive events are those that can quickly and bravely, realistically stare right into it. Those of us who've anticipated storms in the Gulf, we know it does no good to provide empty reassurances. When we're seeing a Category 4 hurricane, we know that's a really big deal, and we don't want people to tell us it's going to be all right. The next phase is a tough one because we go through a lot of upheaval trying to make decisions, don't quite land because we don't have all the information yet, but we still try. I think where we are in this region now is in a kind of limbo. You know, it really very much feels like we're all the afternoon before the hurricane hits when we know it's going to be big and we're a little holding our breath. Again, we shouldn't spend too much time there. The first item on my 13 things to know about leadership and disasters is no one's coming. And that's not a message of despair. That's a message that says, this is your disaster, your arena, your city, your county, your region, you own it. So the idea of rescue is really counterproductive. What's really, really effective is looking at what power and resources that are at your disposal and thinking, what must I do with this now and who must I be connected to?
Well, thank you, Angela. I appreciate your remarks there. When we talk about leadership here in the region, I'd say there's nothing like a crisis to bring out the best in leaders. And you, as a leader of Baker Ripley for many years, have been very visible in the community and practiced leadership for a number of years. How do you define leadership, and in good times and in bad? And what should leaders be doing at this time?
So I had the opportunity over the last 15 years to travel the world and to places where unthinkable things have happened. And I was most interested, I did some work with Meg Wheatley, some work with Bruce Katz at Brookings, but as we went into these places where these enormously disruptive events had occurred, I was really looking for what were the postures and positions and actions of leaders that emerged after storms, after disruption. And what's most interesting is leadership has very little to do with position. So we tend to, in this moment of limbo, we're all looking and saying, well, there's a CEO, he or she ought to be doing something. That person holds a position of power. Why aren't they doing something? But leadership is not tied to position. Leadership is someone willing to step forward, take responsibility, start to assemble the pieces that are necessary to serve and help those most greatly impacted. And I think that whenever I'm working with leaders in the moment, what has been most clarifying for all concerned is to say, let's put at the center of this who's most impacted right now by this. And if we put the two groups that we see that are most vulnerable and most impacted, we're looking first at people who are becoming ill, many of them critically ill, that's already begun. And then we see that this is a reminder, we're in a twin disaster. We have a preceding virus that's super powerfully great at spreading It knows it spreads, it infects, it's good at that. And on the other track, we have an unfolding economic disaster, a really tragic disaster impacting a lot of vulnerable families, a lot of businesses. At the same time, we have a dropping oil price and a market that's bouncing around, scaring the pants off of us. So the people most hurt in both of those arenas need to be put in our minds at the center so that we can then work out from that. And as we look at those two groups of individuals, then we know what to concern ourselves with. I mean, what metrics should matter, what our dashboard should say every day, our decision-making dashboard needs to have on it.
Angela, how are we doing as leaders? What should we be doing today? What should we be doing a month from now? And what should we be doing 3 months from now?
So I want every single thing I say to be taken in the spirit of encouragement and not criticism. I think we are blessed with a lot of people in this region that deeply care about the entire region and everyone in it. And as I was having conversations with leaders in the last 2 weeks, 3 now, I was really struck by how quickly people were pivoting from their own concerns about their families and businesses and quickly to who else can I help. But this is a multi-layered, multi-sector disaster. It's hitting us on every front. It hits us where, in terms of our livelihoods, our health, and most upsetting, I think, is how it's taken from us a sense of belonging, our ability to show up in the places that we love, knowing we're welcome, which reminds us all, if we're fortunate, there is a place for us in the world. So all of that is threatened. These are the fundamental human hungers: earn, learn, belong, which is a Baker Ripley slogan that I very much subscribe to. So this is hitting us on all three. So the response, right now, I see a lot of leaders sort of hunkered down. They're hunkered down in their own sectors. They're hunkered down in their own organizations, in their own institutions, trying to come to terms with this. And so, Russell, the deal is, they're not going to get through it alone. And it's not a multi-sig, cannot have a single sector or single faceted response. It's going to take all of us. We need health organizations. We need workforce and small business efforts to be at the table. We need nonprofits at the table. We need private business at the table, people that have thought and anticipated and planned. We need a concerted effort.
Well, thank you. Angela, when I look back at Hurricane Harvey, there were, I think, a lot of lessons learned there regarding resilience. Is there anything that we learned from Hurricane Harvey that can be applied to this particular situation now?
Well, Hurricane Harvey was very much a no one's coming event, and that all of the institutions that we anticipated, the bigger, better, stronger, faster institutions that we think are supposed to come and rescue us, couldn't quite get here. So it compelled us to look around, to see who we could trust, to assess the strengths and resources in the arena, and then assemble them to respond. And this is another event that's just like that. Yes, there will be, the CARE Act was passed, it has some provisions in it, but it's still up to leaders, business leaders in this community, chambers in this region, to figure out how to deploy that so it actually reaches people quickly. There are 2 cities on my radar this morning. One is Chicago and the other Indianapolis, that have both set up large small business funds that are more accessible and more immediately accessible than some of the federal help is going to be. And I think those are the cities that are going to fare better because they're not waiting. And they know that, 3 weeks for a small business is game over. So I think what we learned from Harvey is we have enormous capacity in this region. And, but I'm just going to shorten it this way. What gets led gets done. So what gets led gets done. We all perform better when there's clear, definitive leadership, and we're getting some overall direction.
Sure. Well, you stated recently in the Houston Chronicle interview that this COVID-19 pandemic was a very complex, multi-layered crisis. And what needed to happen was all leaders from all sectors to band together. And I can recall during Hurricane Katrina at the Jar Jar Brown Convention Center, it seemed to me that political, business, and community leaders all gathered there as kind of a ground zero. And it seems like everyone was speaking from the same sheet of music and working collaboratively on that event. Is that kind of collaborations happening now?
Yeah, I think there probably are some, but here, you know, what's hurting us now is everything's invisible. The pain of the people who've gotten an email or a text message that said your job's gone, that pain's invisible. The people facing the rent is due today, and some people have it and a lot of people don't. That's invisible. We're seeing people are going to the hospital, invisible. So it was in some measure easier for us to come together around what was visible, and we could see one another in action, and we could take our cues from other leaders. And that really makes a difference, but we cannot let that stop us. I think we've used a lot. Just think about globally, we've been on this huge learning curve. We're all sort of amateur kindergarten epidemiologists now. We've been talking about flattening curves. We understand disease spread. We've been trying, Russell, to come to terms with how this is alike and how it's different. And I think we're going to move more quickly now together, that now that we've gotten our hands around the fact that some of the things, yes, we ought to be good at this. We ought to be good at this. But we have to recognize that this is a moment to step outside of our own sector, our own organizational interests. And then if you don't mind, there's just one thing I just want to say to everyone listening. You know, I find two kinds of people in their arena, and I'll be broad in these generalizations, and nobody completely fits into each category. One person looking after, I call them careerists. They're focused on competency and their organization, their defined role, and perhaps their job description, the specific mission of their organization. And I find that other people are saying, well, whatever I was doing before, clearly at this moment, this is what I must work on. And I really want to encourage everyone in this region to understand you're on the team or you're in the way. That's it. There's just one or the other, because this is enormous. You're on the team or you're in the way. And if you're breathing, you should sign up.
Sure. Well, Angela, as we're talking here, I see a number of people are raising their hands, and I want to remind them that we will be taking questions at the end of this conversation. I want to encourage people to use the Q&A button or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to begin submitting your questions. Angela, as I think about the nonprofit, and Center for Houston's Future, as I mentioned earlier, is a nonprofit. We have probably over 20,000 plus nonprofits in the Houston region. What should be the role of nonprofits as we respond to COVID-19 coronavirus?
So the same as all three sectors need to step up. And in the nonprofit sector, there's the only thing unique about the nonprofit sector is mission. It's the permission granted, the commitment that's made within the mission to be about the people you serve. And to put that, and I spoke recently with Anna Coffey, who leads the women's home. So it was a terrific conversation because Anna said, you know, I'm going to do the right thing. She had some advantages. She's a public health attorney, so she probably recognized what was coming a long time, days and days before other people did, and she began preparing her organization. Some people thought even too soon, but she was right to do it. And she moved forward and she took the right steps. But what was really important is that she was willing to make a call without perfect information. And she said, you know, you do the right thing, you settle up later. And I think that stance and that position on the part of nonprofits is really important. Actions taken now have greater weight and more impact than a wait and see, hope will help later. after everything's sorted.
Sure. Well, many of us represent nonprofit organizations and some corporate organizations, but we've got a lot of people at home that are wanting to know how they could get involved and what role they could play in helping us to lead through this pandemic. Do you have any advice for those?
Well, there's a ton, you know, I want to mention a few things, but please, there's constant appeals through social media and through Houston Chronicle and other trusted sources about institutions that need your help. But I'll give one example. I really enjoy my association with Crowdsource Rescue. Most of you might know they stood up a platform to match individuals in need of rescue with civilians with the capacity to do so during Harvey. And they've recently activated again for this disaster because when we had to close congregate meal sites, seniors had to go home. And home is not the best place for a senior, an aging person who already in some respects is isolated, perhaps by the loss of friends and few family members. So Crowdsource Rescue now is supporting seniors by making sure that food can get to them, and they're partnering with the food bank. We're looking at New York, and I saw some projections today that we should pay attention to, because New York is seeing a strong food supply, the food chain, the supply chain's all working, but they're also seeing huge demand on food bank services. And we can anticipate that too as this wears on. So efforts to support and help those organizations are great. You know, help in general to reach out and connect with seniors. If you're at home, anyone can make a phone call. You know, one of the things I put on my little 13 bits of wisdom is, you know, all the social problems that cause the greatest pain, domestic violence and child abuse and substance abuse. And these are the things that really hurt us on a daily basis. Those all thrive in isolation. So anything, every one of us has both a responsibility and an opportunity to make sure that families we know, that people we know, for whom this is going to be an even more difficult time than some of us on this call, that we reach out to them, that we connect with them, and we do it so regularly that they never have that sense of abandonment, so that rage and despair don't have time to take root.
Sure. Well, you touched on something that I want you to elaborate on a little bit more. You mentioned your 13 keys of wisdom. I'm not certain if that's how you titled them, but I have to tell you that it was very striking when I read that. It read to me kind of like a passage of wisdom from a very experienced leader. And you said some things that I thought were very profound. One thing in particular was you mentioned that a communication strategy, when I know, you know. And I thought that was really powerful. Do you mind sharing a couple other wisdom keys from that list?
Yeah, a little bit about when I know, you know. I have sort of a dashboard on my desk right now, Russell. I mean, I'm actually just, every day I'm saying, what are the unemployment numbers? What's the disease spread? What's the number of tests? What's the med center capacity? There are about 10 pieces of information that for me are going to frame up how we get through this thing, and I'm paying attention to them every day. And I'm so proud of the leaders in this region who are forthcoming about what they're facing, because we can deal with it if we know what it is. Right. I think some of the other, you know, some of the other things that I feel strongly about is those leaders that are doing a great job right now. And I'll give you an example. I've had a long connection with Ashford Communities, and I spoke with Amar Kumar recently, and Amar and his father have run this company. They own apartment complexes, and they're wonderful landlords, and many of their tenants are going to be, already are, impacted by what's unfolding economically. But he says, you know, this is our principles. You know, we believe in a karmic approach to this, that we need to treat people, these are our customers, but they're in our residents, and we want them to still be with us when this is over. So early in this, they started laying down, what are our aspirations and principles? What are we going to be guided by? So people who did that, those institutions with leaders who took that step to say, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to be guided through this. And I watched Steve Stevens at Amaji host a call for their customers to say, you know, we're here, this is how we're going to get through this, this is how we're going to talk about it. That's incredibly important. And show up for it, and be in it. You know, these are people with the capacity to consider the whole. You know, if I'm just looking at my bottom line and I'm not looking at my vendors, suppliers, customers, colleagues, and associates, you know, I'm going to miss the opportunity to build a stronger organization, the bridge to a stronger organization, which should be a goal.
Angela, I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll go to our viewers for some Q&A. Reference back to something that you said in the Houston Chronicle recently. You said something to the effect that clinging to the hope of getting back to how things were before will keep us from moving forward productively, and indeed perhaps hold us back in destructive ways. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so I'll say it a little this way, Russell. I'm accused of being quite blunt on this subject, so I might as well go ahead and be blunt on it. Not everything should be preserved. And one of the things that, you know, I think it's been said by others, we shouldn't waste a good disaster. And disasters break my heart for the human suffering involved. And yet, there are also moments of elimination in which the choices we make every day that largely seem insignificant. We're not face to face with the people impacted by them. Sure. We see them in disasters as very stark. Who do we resource? Who do we save? Who do we help? Who do we leave to fend for themselves? So my feeling is this, you know, there's going to be a time when we say, you know, the way we used to do it, we need to let go of that. And a scramble, recovery, if we define it as a scramble back to what was, just like after floods and hurricanes, that quick scramble just to rebuild what we had, Harvey, I think, really drilled it into our heads that scramble is not where we should be headed. So in this event as well, we're going to be looking at different new risk factors. We're going to be understanding our supply chains differently. We're going to be examining our partnership relationships with countries and suppliers and cities around the world. So there's a lot of new learning going on, and it could pave the way to a stronger, for us to be a stronger region and a stronger country. But we're going to have to approach it that way. If our only perspective is, let's get back to what was as quickly as possible, we miss the opportunity to learn what we need to from this. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. Well, it looks like we've got a few questions that are coming in, Angela, so I'm going to pivot now and start taking some of those questions and ask you to respond to them. The first question that we have is, what are the three sectors that you mentioned who need to step up?
So we have the public sector. You know, we have our elected officials that are working really hard now to consider and weigh all the different dimensions of this. We have them, the local ones, state and federal. I think it was it should have included everybody in right at the beginning when the governor basically punted the decision about whether or not to make certain declarations or give certain orders back to counties and cities. And very clearly, that was a message: you're on your own. We're not coming and you're not getting any cover. So we have to be proud that we had leaders locally that were willing to step forward and try to craft something that they thought was workable for this region. So we look to the public sector because they have power in law and they have resources and they have standing in terms of making these calls. We looked at the private sector, and a great example, and certainly he's not the only one, but Scott McClellan and HEB. Why do we love them? Because Scott, both in Harvey and now, anticipated this, and not with some musty 1980s kind of plan. He envisioned, what would this be like if we were compelled to work this quickly in this dire of a situation, with this sort of desperate sensibility, and they stepped in and they were ready. So the private sector has a great flexibility and tons of power. Now I'm seeing other, I'm seeing Michael Knight with Better World Properties, who says early on, this is a pain pie and it can't only be borne by investors or owners or the residents. We don't want the people who always have to bear the whole thing. How do we share in this? So these are the kinds of leaders that are useful in the private sector because they're thinking about the whole. And then in the philanthropic and nonprofit sector, what we want to avoid in the nonprofit sector is being, I'm again being a little blunt here, we're not to be the handmaids. It's not about the private sector saying, well, we're only going to do this, and the public sector saying, well, our purview is just this, and then whatever falls, pieces and elements fall through that, then somehow the nonprofit sector is supposed to suck it up and do it. I think early on in disasters, nonprofits have to choose to step forward on behalf of the people they serve. So your purpose should drive what you do. And the purpose of the organization, I always say, if you're in your purpose zone because you can complete the sentence, we exist too. And nonprofit sectors have the voice and the representation responsibility for those who sit at the center and who are currently and will in the long term suffer most. So, those three sectors at the table have all the pieces of what's necessary to try to move us forward.
Okay. So my next question is, how might we address the resource overwhelm situation for both leaders and consumers of information?
So the resource overwhelm, as in, is that being personally overwhelmed by the circumstances, or is it being, all right, so now this is a really tough thing. Like, I'm fairly tough about when you're in an arena where there's as much suffering as there is now, and we're facing as much uncertainty. Everybody on this call won the human being lottery. You have a roof over your head, access to technology, very likely a modicum of education, and probably some measure of financial stability, even though your job may be up for grabs and threatened. You've had it pretty well, relatively speaking. And I really want to challenge people to say this, wherever you're sitting today, if we can't count on you to do a little extra, we're in really big trouble because there's somebody in a much worse situation. So the overwhelm will come. The definition of a disaster is that it exceeds the capacity, our processes and our normal way of doing business. It overtops it. The water comes over the seawall. That's a disaster. So, I guess the bluntest way I can say it is, this is Earth. It ain't heaven. And we face these things, and people, and to further remind you, there are people in the world for whom every day is a struggle for groceries. Every single day is a concern about health and the lack of access to medical care. Every day is a fight for a day, even an hour of schooling for their children. So we're the equal of this, because we're a far better resource than many of the people that have faced far worse than we're facing.
Well, my next question is one that I think those in the nonprofit community will really be eager to hear your wisdom on. How might nonprofit organizations now begin to think about their funding stream currently and in the future as we deal with the economic fallout given this crisis?
Well, this is going to seem a rather weak response, but I'll tell you from the conversations I've had, there are two things that are being done right now by the really effective nonprofit folks. One is their willingness to deal with it. I mean, they really are saying, I can't serve seniors the way I normally do. Now let me pivot because I've got to serve them in a new way. And they're totally willing to toss out that, program model that was much beloved and hard fought for and so forth, and substitute something that works right now. And then And then this is the part that's sort of difficult. And somewhere between, midnight and 2 a.m., write it down. Because I think as we document the way we work now, it provides a roadmap, and it is the lesson that we can examine for the future, because we're going to find many of us who thought that working from home was the most wonderful thing could ever happen are now finding working from home is really the worst thing that could happen to us. Some of us feel we're probably a little bit too close to the potato chips for our well-being. But whatever we learn, we need to make sure we need, whatever we experience, we need to make sure there's learning, and that requires reflection. So I'm seeing really, really tough, really good nonprofit leaders make hard calls. And the reason I would call them out for this is that we make hard calls all the time in the nonprofit sector. You choose to spend more time raising money for seniors over children, or you fight for children and you know that you can only do this, or you have a limited amount of attorney hours that you can spend fighting an immigration battle. Which of the people that are in dire need of that do you serve? These are really painful choices that get made all the time, and they're right up on our screen today in an even more acute way. So that takes a kind of moral courage. And I read a beautiful piece of writing from one of my Brown University colleagues who fought Ebola, and he was expressing his own inner struggles with the decisions he was forced to make in the field, really the kinds of decisions that we're dreading now. Who gets a ventilator? So amongst us, we have sort of the oath takers, the people that have spoken out and declared themselves committed to others' well-being over their own. And they're going to be making these kind of painful choices. So we all have to be brave about the painful ones we have to make.
Sure. My next question, Angela, how and where are you seeing leaders best connect with other leaders that are perhaps working in silos? And how do we work through that so that we don't see a lot of repeat work and we can be the most useful and the most impactful?
Well, I don't think we're quite doing it yet. Maybe a lot of it's going on very quietly in a sort of invisible way, partly because and I have complete empathy for this, the willingness to step forward and say, this is all I know and I'm scared of all the rest. People don't want to sit at a table and that, figuratively now, of course, or appear on Zoom in a tile with a screen of tiles with people when they don't have answers. So I do think those leaders that are willing to show up and say, look, this is what I'm dealing with. So in a society that largely, an economic system that fosters and encourages and thrives, we believe, on competition, now it's shared understanding and shared learning and a quick exchange of insights that would really benefit us most. But if you're sitting, you're running a business and you have a very uncertain future now because your supplier just cratered, you don't know, do you call your competitor and say, what are you doing? So we're conditioned against that. But once you reach this level of disruption, it's like most of the nonprofit leaders know that after the long tail of recovery, the long tail of response is a messy, chaotic, sticky mess. Basically it's a lot of people reaching out in new ways and coming together in different structures of decision making and sharing than what we use for normal times. This is a hard step for people to take. I would love to see now, a collection of 12 to 20 institutional leaders, and I speak about institutional leaders because these are people that sit with some degree of authority and control and command over resources and people that can be deployed or tweaked to move in different ways depending on how those economic factors and those health factors unfold over the next few weeks. And a constant flow of information and the 360-degree view of this arena would benefit a lot of us.
Our next question, Angela, what are some things that you feel need to fall away or just be eliminated as a result of this crisis?
You know, I really don't know yet, but I like to think of what's emerging or what's perking. What can we see the shape and the outline of? And there's already been, of course, talk about we're going to have a different view of risk factors for cities. You know, cities that are global and connected and international and diverse. I mean, these are all strengths, but now we're seeing that you're also the frontline hub for the spread of anything, even the things that we are not so excited to get. So we'll be rethinking what is a risk factor, what does risk look like in a city like Houston. But there are some, and then of course, what are supply chains? How do we build trust and connection so that we believe in that people on the other end of the line and what the relationship will be to us when the unthinkable occurs. But in small ways, I mean, many of us who probably felt the only way we could have a meaningful connection was face-to-face and person-to-person, are learning that there's a really powerful thing that happens when you have a screen full of people that you're having an exchange with, and that somehow there's a form of intimacy even that's occurring over the calls and meetings that are occurring online. That's worth learning. That we may never want to go back to flying constantly to get to places when we realize we can actually do it pretty well this way. I think one of the things that I'm paying close attention to, and I'm going to sound a little shaky when I say it, but it has long frustrated me, our inability to appreciate the work of people that earn the lowest wages. We act like that.
I'm sorry, I've lost connection here. Angela, I can't hear you. Angela, are you there? Okay, I think I've lost Angela, but for those of you who are still connected and still viewing, thank you so much for joining us. Angela, thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your wisdom and insights on how we can continue to work through and lead through this pandemic. I want to say a couple of things about our next broadcast. Our next webcast next week will build on today's conversation and provide an overview of adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership is a framework that was developed by Harvard University professor Heinz that helps individuals and organizations adapt and thrive through challenging times and challenging environments. The principles of adaptive leadership have been used extensively in many settings. A Nobel Prize winner used the concept to settle the Civil War in Colombia, by military who prepare new officers, and by local organizations who are developing civic entrepreneurs. Judy Lee, president of Take Group Consulting, will be our guest next week, and she will share her views on adaptive leadership, and I'm looking forward to that conversation with Judy. Again, to our viewers, thank you so much for being with us. Angela, I think that you're back now. I'm not sure what happened. I lost you. Can you hear me, Angela?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. I just want to, again, thank you so much for being with us today. I think your wisdom and insights have really edified all of us. And I think we could all go forward and be better leaders as a result of it. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing here locally and globally. And I will be following you personally with increased interest. So thank you so much for your support.
Take care. And bye to everybody.
Goodbye, everyone. We thank you for being with us. Stay safe and be well.